It's a list of famous people with disabilities or ADD. Albert Einstein, Nelson Rockefeller, Mozart, John Lennon, Beethoven, Tom Cruise, Cher, Whoopi Goldberg, Danny Glover. So if you think of your brain almost like a computer or hard drive, some people have trouble processing the information. So if they read something, they may understand it, but when they have to answer questions about it, they go blank. They may have trouble knowing, it's like if your brain is a hard drive, where do I store this information? How do I retrieve it? And how do I apply it? It affects your oral language, speaking, and sometimes it can affect even interpersonal relationships when you're talking with somebody. You always get the feedback that people aren't understanding what you're saying. It might be about a disability. It could be about other things as well. It can affect your reading. So you're reading something you understand, but as soon as you look up, you can't remember anything. Your written language can be spelling, but it could be very much about organizing your thoughts and put your ideas down in paper. So some learning disabled students can verbally tell you exactly what they mean and what they want to write, but when they try to put it down on paper, that's very difficult for them. It can affect your ability to do well with math. To understand math is kind of abstract, and so it can be very, very difficult for somebody with a learning disability. Sometimes when you have a learning disability, it means that you may have to work harder or be more willing to accept help. The really unfortunate thing about learning disability is that people very often end up feeling like they're not as smart as somebody else. Learning disability doesn't have anything to do with being not smart. People with learning disabilities are always at least average intelligence or higher. In fact, a hallmark of learning disability is that you do really, really well in some things, but other areas, as hard as you try, you can't do them. But just because I may have to study harder, and just because I need to ask for help, does not mean I'm not intelligent, and it does not mean that I cannot be successful. This is a simplistic example, but if you're great in English, but no matter how hard you try, you cannot do math, you might have a learning disability. If you were not a student at City College, and you sought out learning disability testing privately, it cost at the minimum $2,000, usually between $2,000 and $3,000. Here, it's completely free. It is extensive testing. You don't do it all in one day, but I think it's about 6 to 8 hours of testing. And what they'll do is first they'll sit down and talk with you to assess whether there's enough reason to put you through all of this testing. They're going to want to know a little bit about your history, like was math always hard? Do other family members have any learning disability? Were you ever told when you were younger that you had a disability? In some schools, special ed was kind of a place where they would track students with quote-unquote behavior problems. So many people don't want to take advantage of services for disabled students because they're afraid that they're going to be tracked into dummy classes, or that it's going to be on their record, or that their teachers will know. And in fact, your disability is confidential, and it's up to you to let your instructors know if you want them to know that you have a learning disability. The great advantage of being a student in Disabled Student Services is that you get priority registration. You know how hard it was to get classes this semester. You can never get rid of your disability, but you can learn to work around your disability. Accepting help and asking for help, for some of us is very difficult. It makes us feel like there's something wrong with us. But a learning disability is neurological. It can be inherited. It's nothing that's bad about you. It's that you think differently. So it's important to look at yourself and think about, I have these strengths and I have these weaknesses, and I'm going to get help and support around my weaknesses. Learning disabled people can be successful. A former president of the college here was learning disabled. You just need some special accommodations. It's not a big deal. It depends on the extent of your disability. You can have a little disability, or you can have a big one. So sometimes a learning disability is quite small and specific, and sometimes it can be quite broad. Or sometimes you can do very well in lots of areas, but there's one area that you need some special help with. They're going to want to know, well, why do you think you have a learning disability? And if you say, I can't do math, then try to talk to them more about it. If there's one subject that you can't do, you have to think about, am I trying my hardest? Is it because I'm so anxious about this subject that I have a hard time? But if I were calm and really tried, would I be able to do this? Sometimes it could be anxiety, but it could be a learning disability. I would say take advantage of our services and find out, is it a learning disability? Because then you will not have to struggle so much. You'll get services to help you out. They have a strategy lab to really help you with your homework and preparing for tests. If you've been evaluated for a learning disability in the past, if you bring in your paperwork from that, they can work with you, or they may want to retest you. And if you take the test and it turns out that you're not learning disabled, which is very often the case, students have come back and said, you know, they didn't say I had a learning disability, but they did tell me I have these strengths and weaknesses, and I learned a lot about myself and what situations will work best for me. Like one student said, I learned I'm the kind of person who needs to sit in the front row. And somebody else said, I learned I'm the kind of person that needs to study in an environment where there's a lot of activity. Very importantly, are you avoiding classes because of your weaknesses? A lot of people will avoid taking English and math because those are hard areas for them. It's hard to do things that are not satisfying because they're difficult and they're challenging. That's human nature. But avoiding English and math may very well delay graduating and transferring. So if you're avoiding a class because it's hard for you, and if you think you have a learning disability, working with a learning disability specialist could really help you out a lot. We all learn differently. In the last 10 or 20 years, we're learning so much. Science is learning so much about the brain. We don't know a whole lot about how people learn. We teach classes as if we all learn the same way. You sit in your desk and you write and you take notes, but we all learn differently. And educators don't often understand disabilities or haven't been educated about them. So the sad news is some instructors are not going to understand a disability. They may think, well, why do you need extra time on a test? If you get any flack from an instructor, you can talk to your DSPS counselor, and then they can intervene for you and talk with the instructor and explain that this is a legal accommodation. It's because of a neurological issue, and it's your legal right to have that accommodation. You can be brilliant, you can be successful even if you have a learning disability. And if it's always been hard for you having a learning disability, really encourage you to ask for help. It doesn't mean that you're any less of a person if you need some extra help. Make an appointment now. We'll have a whole hour, cozy hour together to talk about whatever you need to talk about.